There is nothing more exciting to me than planning a day out. I literally plan the event sometimes weeks in advance. I make sure the night before all my devices that I use are on charge and my backup power charger is full. I even go so far as rearranging my backpack, ready and waiting, and arrange a playlist on Spotify. So all I need to do in the morning is shower, change and go. In my head I have everything planned, right down to the last detail. When I reach Skelton Junction on the outskirts of York, I race to the windows, anxious to see the city. I love to see what engines are in the sidings, and more importantly, see what engines are currently stabled at the National Railway Museum. It's an exclusive sneak peek, as some of the engines are not able to be viewed anywhere but from the tracks. Rounding the corner, we come to the impressive and beautiful arches that span York Station. Following the success of the Stockton to Darlington Railway and the Manchester to Liverpool Railway, the UK saw a boom in track laying and building. Cities could see the opportunity in this new technology, and soon stations were appearing all over the country. York was no exception. It lies roughly halfway between London and Edinburgh, and they knew they had to jump on the bandwagon. The first railway station to open in York was a simple one. It was built near to Queen Street and was just a simple wooden hut comprising of a single platform, and the line serves just the nearby city of Leeds and Selby via Normanton. Normanton was considered a major link to the other railways, and by changing at Normanton and Derby, a person could make the trip to London from York in just 10 hours. Quite speedy considering it would take more than a day by conventional stagecoach. The railways expanded and soon York outgrew its single wooden structure. The city officials also wanted the railway to be closer to the inner city. However, they had one big problem. The city itself is surrounded by large walls, which you can still see today. The walls were created in 71 AD by Romans, and since then the walls have been strengthened to and added to, with some reaching as high as 20 feet in places and can be up to tens of feet thick. The walls were mostly created for protecting the city from invaders, particularly northern. There are several gates known as bars within the walls, most notably Micklegate Bar, which is the traditional entry point for monarchs to enter the city. In an ancient ceremony practiced even today, monarchs may only enter the city walls through this gate and must touch the state sword presented to the king or queen before giving it back to the city. The walls made the city, and the locals were very proud of them and fought aggressively to preserve them. George Stephenson appealed to the mayor and local lad George Hudson to build the station outside the walls, but Hudson refused and overruled him. Known locally as the Railway King, he invested heavily in the railway and at one point controlled over 1,000 miles of track. But he wanted the station to be as close as possible to the city. The idea that part of the wall would be knocked down for an inner city railway station greatly disturbed the local populace. But despite everyone's pleas, the wall was cut and work began. George Hudson, the Railway King, has other stories to tell, but I'll come back to him in a later video. The station and the Tudor-style arch breaching the wall was designed by George Townsend Andrews, and at the time the station was impressive. It was built in the Italian style and comprised of 2 platforms and an ironclad engine shed. There was refreshment rooms and waiting rooms, a far cry from what York previously had. For the first time ever, Andrews had also incorporated a hotel into the station itself. He saw the potential of business from weary travellers, from people wanting to visit the city, and while it was a bold venture, it was a profitable one. And he was very proud that Queen Victoria herself visited there. After her visit, the hotel was renamed the Royal Station Hotel. George was pleased with his new station. However, there was much grumbling from the staff and public. Following the public outcry from the wall breach, and because of the sheer costs, it was decided the lines travelling between London and Edinburgh would be situated outside the city walls. This meant for the passengers, crew and trains that if York Station was to be used, they would have to pull into the station and then reverse out of it again back onto the line. This was not only time consuming, but considering the lack of signals, it was very dangerous. The station didn't last long, and plans were drawn very quickly to produce a new station that stretched across the new through lines. The new station was designed by Thomas Elliott Harrison, Thomas Prosser and William Peachey, and the first train left the new station in 1877. The station was a far cry from the inner city one because the designers were not restricted by the confines of the inner city walls, and because they saw the relevance that York had, they designed the station with an astounding 13 platforms. Large glass arches covered the station, giving the station a grand appearance, and a new hotel was created nearby. The station was also built on a large curve, something unheard of for the time, and was an engineering marvel. Even today, the station is used as an example of brilliant architecture. It was the largest station the world had ever seen at the time, and it was so big and grand, it was given the nickname of the Iron Cathedral. The forethought of the architects has meant the station has never had to expand its width or add extra platforms, however, as the trains got longer, the lengths of the platforms did too. The original architect had envisioned that the main platform near the entrance would be the provincial platform passengers would use, so they designed the concourse to incorporate the waiting rooms and refreshment rooms with subways leading to the middle platforms for special and excursion trains and the latter platforms for goods and freight. As the station got busier and busier, the platforms for the passenger use expanded, so the islands in the middle had to be widened, and eventually the line where platforms 7 and 8 stand today was cut to allow for more public amenities. Finally, a new overhead pedestrian walkway was created linking the platforms. The subway still exists today, but the passenger footbridge is so much more impressive. The station was a success, and soon many railway companies could see the station's potential. The first carriage works was developed in 1841, around the time of the first station. However, they were moved to Holgate Works, and soon the carriage works and factories developed, creating jobs and giving the companies a needed place to carry out essential maintenance and repair. The lines were expanded, and a new avoider line was implemented, and even today, the station still boasts a sizable and expanding goods and freight yard. The NER, North East Railway, was the main operator out of the station, and used the station as its headquarters as the world turned into the 20th century. The solicitor of the railway at the time, George Gibb, transformed the company. He asked the architect William Bell to construct a new building in 1906 near the station. The building, now the Grand Hotel, helped cement the company's success, and at one point the company had over 56,000 people working within it. It was so important that the NER used the station as a 0 point for all its lines and used the point to measure each one. The company also valued its workers, and soon the Railway Institute was formed. Its creator, Henry Tennant, wanted the workers to feel valued, so he closed the local tavern, which was a hotspot for overindulgence, and redesigned it to include reading rooms, smoking rooms, recreational areas for playing games, and most importantly, 3 new classrooms where workers could further their education. The education reforms were only just being brought in, and many would have received little to no education. Bear in mind that only boys were being given education at the time, and the average leaving age was just 10 years old, with many starting working life when they left. The NER guided the railways safely through the First World War, keeping the railways running, providing valued provisions, goods and troops, as well as bringing the injured men home. In honour of the men coming home, The NER set up the North East Cottage Fund, giving affordable rents to the returning men and setting them up with a roof over their heads. The company also paid fitting tribute by donating a large area of land for a new memorial park. The nationalisation of the railway soon followed, and the NER was swallowed into the LNER. The LNER saw the significance of York and gave it the responsibility of managing the North East region from Doncaster to Berwick. But the resolve of the railway station and the team running it was to be tested again with the Second World War. As I mentioned in my earlier video on the Baedeker bombings, York did not escape Hitler's wrath. The night was tragic for the city and its station. The station and engine stables were bombed, resulting in the loss of many lives, including station foreman William Milner and the loss of 2 locomotives. The station roof had been completely collapsed, parts were on fire, and a commuter train running from London to Edinburgh took a bomb head-on as it rushed through the station. The bombs had crucially caused the pressure in the fire hydrants to drop, and railway workers were faced with an impossible decision: what to save with the little water they had, and what to leave burning. It took 7 hours for the fire crews to finally get the fires within the station under control, but the fire crews were strained to breaking point, and they would have lost the city, but by sheer chance. The city sits on 2 major rivers, the Ouse and the Foss. It was no doubt that the water from both these rivers saved the city from burning that night. Work to clear the line started straight away, and despite the damage, the station was partially repaired and fully operational just 3 years later. It took a further 42 years following the bombings to completely repair the damage. Following the end of the war, the steam era was starting to close, and the roundhouses, stables and turntables that adorned the station began to be used less and less. New signalling meant the signal box situated in the centre of the station was now no longer needed, and some platforms which were barely being used, mainly on the east side, were removed. This did allow for the central footbridge to be extended and eventually becoming the main access point from the station to the museum. It hasn't changed much since then, with only the provision of electrification. The station today is still considered one of the most important and one of the most beautiful stations on the network. It is only one of 10 stations to receive a 5-star rating in the country. Unlike some stations which exist for convenience, York is truly a station that you can take your time in to enjoy the surroundings, the architecture, and to be honest, that large spacious footbridge is a train spotter's dream. But what of the station's future? It was only a few years ago that part of the old station within the walls was demolished to make way for offices. When the crews started the work, they were amazed to discover an old turntable. They were so impressed that the plans for the new offices were changed specifically so they could show off what they found. If you get permission to walk on the land surrounding the station, you can still see the floors and remains of the roundhouses that stabled the engines. The carriage works and yards are still there, as well as an automotive and power depots, which then became the museum. Literally everywhere you look, the station has left its mark, from hotels to old buildings. At the time of this video, the station has just been granted permission for its most extensive regeneration project yet. The entrance to the station has not really designed for the traffic it sees today and has remained unchanged since the 1900s. The plan is to remove the large concrete bridge circling the walls, pedestrianise the current taxi rank with part of the car park, and create dedicated areas for bus and taxi ranks, which are much more accessible. A new multi-storey car park adjacent to the station will also be built. Many of the old railway buildings which are situated in the brownfield regeneration zone have been earmarked for preservation or demolition if the building is not salvageable, and these will be either housing or offered to companies for an incentive. The National Railway Museum site will also be receiving a facelift too. While the buildings themselves will remain mostly unchanged, currently visitors have to use a subway under the main road to go to and from the engine shed and the Great Hall. Recently, the museum has submitted plans to buy the road above and close it. The extra land would allow the team to build a new entrance, finally linking both sheds with one central building and giving the museum much needed space. Sadly, the plans will mean that the works will no longer be part of the museum as a working exhibit, and it is unknown if the warehouse will remain open as well. But the museum will have more space to move and grow. So if you're ever in Yorkshire, I would recommend paying York a visit. It's a beautiful city steeped in history and there's lots to see and do. But if you want to see it properly, leave the car at home and take the train. Trust me, when you see those arches, I guarantee you will not regret it. Before I end the video this week, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who has subscribed and supported me. I never imagined that I would reach 100 subscribers in just a few months. In fact, I fully expected not to get any. I also want to thank you for your kind messages, your words of support, and you are all simply incredible. So I am exceptionally so proud to dedicate this video to every single one of you.